Well, welcome to the Barely Saved podcast, where we have the discussions that real Christians don't have. I'm Rebecca.
I'm Zach.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Caleb. We're glad you could join us.
I know, so what happened? Did we do it?
Yeah,
okay,
we're
cool.
recording.
Mine, my computer froze, and I was like, I was like, I hope I said my name right.
That's okay. This kind of Murphy's Law stuff is great for getting to know us.
No wonder you were a little slow on the uptake there.
Yeah, so the four of us on this call have never met each other in person. We met in a closed group on Facebook, and it sort of built a friendship there, except for Zach. He's new.
I'm already ostracized.
You need four wheels, so.
But that's okay, because the idea for the podcast was his. We're just already all friends besides him. So we're getting to know him. And so, Zach, do you want to introduce yourself to the group of everybody listening?
I'm Zach. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I have a wife and 3 kids. I just recently got out of the military for the last 6 years, and I'm working on my credentials right now to become a pastor. I love family. I love playing sports and playing music. So there we go.
All right, and then you choose which one of us goes next.
Oh, do I get to pick favorites? Okay. Lindsay, because she's from Colorado.
Yes, we're already friends.
Because Colorado is amazing. Yeah.
Although I'm from the western part, so we like to rag on the Springs. I'm just kidding. My family jokes that Colorado is high in general. That's our that's like our license plate saying that we've made up as a family, making fun of the culture here. Anyways, yeah, I'm in Western Colorado. I do campus ministry. I love Colorado. I love the mountains. I love being out here, although I do not love the wildfires that are currently burning everywhere. So if I get a bit delirious, it's because I don't have any AC or air conditioning right now, because we had to turn it all off because there's so much smoke. So if I pass out, you'll have to come make sure that I'm tell someone that I'm okay. You're like, is Lindsay okay?
We do not have emergency contact information for you, Lindsay. This is a problem.
That's all I've got so far. So, Rebecca!
Woo! As I take a bite of my Reese's peanut butter cup, thank you.
That was part of that was on purpose.
I'm Rebecca. I live in Central Washington area, and I'm married. I have a 5-year-old kid, and I'm pregnant with my second. So I'll be, off the podcast for a while when that happens. But maybe I won't. Maybe I'll need that. Maybe I'll need that outlet. And my husband is not in ministry. I am. He works in the workforce as a vocational counselor, and I've been a social studies teacher. I love dogs and animals of all kinds, and that's about it. I've lived in Washington all my life, so I don't have much like other states living going for me at this point.
All right, and I'm Caleb. I'm the only one left, so always.
Oh yeah, you're my favorite, Caleb.
It's okay. I've been last to be chosen since elementary school, so I'm used to it.
Oh, that was low. I feel bad now.
So I'm currently in North Carolina. I am sort of kind of pretending to work as a media director person for a church that I'm volunteering at. Not on staff at a church, paid. It's fun. But, I studied children's ministry. I've been a children's pastor. I've been a youth pastor. I've been a media pastor. I've done all of those things, and I do a variety of hobbies, basically all of them: sewing, quilting, crocheting, gardening, woodworking.
Getting attacked by animals.
All of those. Getting attacked by animals. All of the things. I do most hobbies. So, and that's about me.
Oh, I guess I could have added that I'm in children's ministry as well. That's what me and my wife do at our church.
Well, now you've added it.
I don't remember if I said it either. College ministry for me.
I'm an associate pastor, so I do everything.
See, look at that. I wasn't last anymore. So how we're going to sort of structure these podcasts, for those of you listening, is we're going to sandwich some church ministry and theology talk between 2 news stories, which may or may not be related to church ministry or theology. So with that, in the podcast links, there is a video, which I encourage you to pause the podcast and go looking up, because it's quite entertaining, at least to me. Lindsay, do you want to tell them about the story of what happened in LA over the weekend?
I don't have anything pulled up.
Oh, not you. Does somebody else have it pulled up that's not me?
Yeah, I got it pulled up.
All right, Zach's going to tell us about it.
So the headlines reads, "An angry bull chased a crew of firefighters down a Los Angeles road while they were responding to a lake fire." All of that sentence makes no sense. First off, I don't know where the bull came from, and I don't know how lakes catch on fire. Right. The video is actually pretty funny though, because they're just scared, and it looks like the video's from inside the bucket truck. I have only met one bull like that in my life. It's like a longhorn bull. When I was in Oklahoma, we were fishing, and I went to go around the lake, and I went around a tree, and there's just a big, huge bull just standing there, and it's just, they're scary. They're huge.
Yeah.
And I was like, guess I'm gonna go home now, because you can't do anything.
I think it's funny that they called him Ferdinand the Bull, because the entire story of Ferdinand the Bull is that he's doesn't want to be in the fight, and so they dubbed him Ferdinand, and I was like, wait, no, that is compromising the integrity of Ferdinand.
Yep. Oh man, I hate cows. When I was I guess it was actually a few years ago, my dad decided he was going to raise cattle, 2 of them, on my parents' land out in the country. And my parents had a cattle dog and never seen cows, and these cows had never seen a cattle dog before. It turns out the whole "the cow jumped over the moon" is more possible than I thought, because this cow jumped the fence and escaped to the suburbs of Austin and hid for 2 weeks, and we had to chase it down. And they were like, "Oh, it's fine. It's a super nice cow. You can it's like a 4-H cow. You can show it."
It's a nice cow.
Tried to kill me. It ran straight at me as I'm trying to catch it. And it's this little dorky looking, it's called a lowline Angus. So it looks like a corgi, but a cow. So it's a little short, shrunken cow with little bitty legs. And it was still terrifying, because it's just charging you down. I can't even imagine how scary a bull would be if I thought I was going to die from this little corgi cow thing.
Lindsay, I think we have identified the root of most of your issues. It's that you have never loved a cow.
I love eating them.
That is not the same.
Delicious.
We named them Sirloin and T-Bone after that, because every time we fed them, we were mad because they'd taken 2 weeks of time trying to find them again.
Hold on. Did you eat them though?
We did, yes.
Yeah. There you go.
They were raised as
You got revenge.
Absolutely. He was delicious.
My dad raised and stepmom raised Scottish Highlanders for several years, but they're so cute and shaggy and fluffy, and we did still eat them, but we bred them to sell them more than eat them ourselves, which was helpful, because I didn't want to know that I was eating one of the fluffy red cows. Even though I'm totally not a vegetarian and I love meat, I'm I don't want to know that I'm eating an animal that I fed and cuddled. Not that I really cuddled with the cows, but you can.
Yeah, having the one cow be evil, having me the first time I ever raised an animal that we ate, was really helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful.
Because there was no love lost between me and that cow.
I had a chicken like that who would come at you when you were trying to gather an egg, and I was like, I don't feel bad taking your eggs anymore. Stop trying to kill me.
That's fantastic. Oh man, I just can't imagine how freaked out the firefighter and the bulls were though, right? Because here we've got fires all around us too, and there's a bear wandering around our town right now because it came down out of the mountains to get away from the fire. So it's these poor animals are freaking out, and then there's they're sweet, it's safe. They're why are there people everywhere? Right?
Kill me.
Right. I feel bad for the bull. All the bull's trying to do is escape the fires that burned down the fence post that held him where he was. And now there's these men with weird suits spraying water hoses. I'd be...
Yeah, loud noises and bright things. And
I'd be running down the street too.
I still hate cows.
Well, I'm glad. I feel like we've accomplished a significant amount on this first podcast of identifying the roots of Lindsay's angst.
That's why I'm so salty. It's the cow's fault.
It's all the cows.
We did have a guy who used to walk his cow down our street when I was a little kid. He would also poop in the yard, so it's probably I just don't like cows. Yeah, that's it.
On a leash? You can walk cows on a leash? That's nuts.
That's a bit more positive experience though. Cute cow walking down the street.
It was until I stepped in a cow patty for the first time.
Ooh, yeah, that's not a positive experience.
And then I went full Texan as a kid, and we used to play cow patty baseball.
So I don't feel like that's a valid reason that if you started playing cow patty baseball after.
Things you do at youth camp, man.
So the stories of playing baseball, I have a friend who grew up in Honduras. He was at MK, and him and his brother used to go out with like a stick to where the tarantulas would lay out in the ground in the day. I think they were in DR at the time, and they would go out and flip them up, and one would flip the spiders into the air, and then the other one would hit them like a baseball.
I would do that too. Spiders are terrifying. I don't care how big or little they are. I'm terrified.
So if you have big enough spiders, you can play baseball with them just like you can play cow patty baseball.
I believe it. Ugh.
Wow.
Nope, no spiders for me.
No, I don't have big enough spiders for that, and I'm okay with it.
Spiders should not get that big.
Nope.
But spiders are cool. Like, you can't hug a spider if it's small.
I love watching them on like nature shows and stuff. I just don't want them near me.
I like the ones that eat the other bugs.
That's fair.
Not ones that are actually big enough to eat meat.
Yeah, I don't know which ones are which. I don't care.
I grew up on the crocodile hunter, so I'm actually really well acquainted with most of the animal kingdom.
That's awesome.
No, nope. We don't have really
Jeeps.
big insects
Cooler.
here in Washington, which is helpful. We have a couple poisonous ones, and that's it. It's not terrible.
All right. So our next section of our podcast, our rough structure that we'll hammer out and probably have less awkward transitions in the future. Is
I love the
that-
awkward transitions though.
I
Feels like now
think
I know.
we might keep them, but
That's the real
New
reason
story.
podcasts have like the music interludes, right? They're like, that was an awkward cut. So if we cut it and put music there, that was on purpose and it wasn't an awkward
Yeah.
transition. Like, that's the real reason those exist.
it is, because then you can just start the music and then now everybody knows, oh, we're switching. So it's no secret that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, as everybody
What?
is. Yeah.
You wouldn't know from being in my town.
Oh,
Okay, it might be
I
news to
didn't
some parts
know.
of the country, but that's sort of the problem, right? Like, currently there's these wars going on about masks, whether or not we should wear masks when we go in public, when we're inside, when we're outside, where we should. Lindsay should be wearing one in her house probably because of the smoke. But
So much smoke.
But what are your guys' thoughts on not just the mask mandates, but sort of on the reactions of people to those mandates? I'm interested to see what your guys' thoughts are on that.
Who wants to go first and ruin their life?
Not Lindsay.
Yeah. Yes, they don't let me talk.
Oh man.
Oh, I this whole thing. Okay, so the first thing is that I think the fact that we keep using, and by we I mean just like society in general, keep using the phrase "war on," insert issue here, is like immensely unhelpful because it's just inflammatory. Like, I had a friend who posted about like asking a genuine question of like wanted to hear from anybody who supports President Trump, like how they like reconcile the fact that he has this like war on USPS, but he requested a mail-in ballot himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way, which it's a valid question, but the phrase "war on," I was like, that was my only feedback. I was like, I'm not even gonna answer the question, but if you want actually valid responses or you want actual dialogue with people, I think we need to be careful of the way that we are, or just be at least cognizant of the way that we're asking questions and not making everything a war, because not everything is.
But don't you know that liberals are at war with Christians?
What?
Oh my goodness.
Hey, it ain't so. So that's
Hold on,
was
is that why
something
we're,
that came up
is that why we're
yesterday.
barely saved? Is because
Yes,
we're more
that we're
liberalish leftists,
barely
so we're barely
saved,
saved.
apparently.
Yeah.
To most, that's yeah. To get to the third level of heaven, you have to be Republican.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever said that though? Like, is that a thing? I wonder if that's like somebody had to have said that.
It is in the South. I've heard that sentiment almost, not explicitly
Yeah.
expressed, but it's definitely implied
Yeah,
strongly.
I think so.
I've definitely heard it preached from some pulpits that you pretty much have to vote for the Republican ticket or else you're not saved because of abortion.
You know what's crazy? I was looking this up the other day when we were talking about denominations and on Facebook. But did you know that the Baptist Faith and Message, which is the basically for Southern Baptists, they don't really have creeds, but it's basically the equivalent of a Baptist creed. They did not take a stance on abortion until a negative stance against abortion until 1980. In 1971, they were absolutely fine with it and thought it was a good thing.
Really?
1971?
1971, they had a paper that came out in favor of abortion as basically preventing harm to the mother. Like if the baby was like going to die or going to have complications and things like that, they're like, yeah, this makes sense. 1971, they were okay with it.
Yes, they were, which is interesting because
It's not even saying it's like not taking a stance, but the point is you can see that it's been used as a political tool because that's around the same time we get like the Southern strategy and all of that happening. So it's explicitly a political move because it took them almost a decade to decide it was not a moral issue, but a political issue.
Yeah, I think that whole abortion thing that I brought up on the Facebook where they were talking about how the abortion topic has just been like a carrot in front of a horse's mouth type of thing the whole time.
Yeah.
Because we haven't fixed it, and I don't think they're ever going to fix it. So let's fix the world instead of this one topic. I guess that was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But masks.
Yeah, we devolved real quick.
Yeah, we went real far.
I think we didn't just devolve. I think we went there for a reason, right? Because the political parties in this country have used things that should not necessarily be political issues, the value of life, as a determining factor, right? Now, this is sort of a weird script, right? Because in this case, the Republicans supposedly value life in wanting to stop abortions. But when it comes to masks, they totally don't care, right? And then the Democrats who want to protect life but liberty, right, like freedom, are like, no, wear a dang mask because that's an easy way to not kill your neighbor.
But then don't necessarily. But then at least the platform doesn't necessarily then value the life of unborn either. So then there's that's what the other side would say too.
Right. So we made morality a political platform and then said, Christians, you need to stand up for morality by voting a specific party persuasion.
Yeah.
But it's only one moral stance. Like abortion is the only one moral stance that conservatives have. It's like if you look at the Democratic Party, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, they have more like, hey, trying to help people, welfare, food stamps, all that stuff, and
education.
Education. I've actually just realized this over the last 3 months. I've been educated since I joined the group, but yeah, you guys are just like, I didn't call anybody. But the conservatives, we just have like I say we, like I'm a conservative still, but we just have that like, oh, well, abortion's wrong, so vote for us. We'll maybe do something. Never.
Eventually.
Yeah, eventually.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point because that moral authority piece, I even just like saw some conversation in a different group I'm in about asking the question of what did people think about the DNC, like having Bill Clinton speak and then kind of be talking about, I actually didn't listen to his speech, so I shouldn't speak to that. But what, if the Democratic Party is trying to like make themselves look like the moral authority compared to the Trump administration, like having former President Bill Clinton like may not have been the best option. Like there was probably better speakers they could have chosen. But I hadn't thought about that, Zach, from the standpoint of the platform of the GOP in general. It's like pro-life, anti-abortion, but as far as the other like main platform ideas, most of them don't have to do with morality. They have to do with protection of either preconceived ideas about free speech and liberty and religious liberty, of those things. But I hadn't really thought about that, of it being of that being one of the main discrepancies or differences.
It's such an easy point to galvanize people around, right? Like the moment, like it's like either murder babies or not, like what choice do you have?
Right.
Right. And that's a great way to frame it, because how else do you get around that? Right. Like it's brilliant rhetoric, because how are you going to be like, well, I believe that all life has value. And they're like, then why do you care about killing these ones? And you're like, it's it's actually terrible rhetoric, and it's also brilliant rhetoric, right? Like, it's brilliant because there is no arguing with it, and that's also why it's terrible, is because you can't engage with something that emotionally charged because it's designed to not be engaged with, right? It's designed, and this is actually great. Dallas, I think I mentioned this too the other day, but like Dallas Willard talks about taking the Lord's name in vain in his book, The Divine Conspiracy, and his implication is like, that is less of swearing and cursing, and it is more using faith as a bludgeon to basically circumvent the logic and the minds that God has given to people. He's like, this is what God wants, do it. As like using it like a bludgeon, like we see in that moment. Like, that's part of why that rhetoric is terrible. But he implies that kind of rhetoric is actually closer to taking the Lord's name in vain in its original understanding than somebody saying things that would make church people really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I wonder if it was the same book that we read in Chi Alpha about it, because we read one once when I was in college in regards to like relooking at the Ten Commandments, and maybe it is the same book. But I remember learning that in regards to like taking the Lord's name in vain. And I don't remember it being phrased that way. This was like a decade ago though, so who knows? But I remember it really like resonating with me that it talked about like when we attribute something to God that isn't in his nature, and that can be anything, like, or when we put words in God's mouth that he didn't actually say, or when we like, and my favorite example to always use was when I would sit down to like mentor one of my girls in college, and they'd be like, well, I don't really think I can come to a core group or Chi Alpha this quarter because God really wants me to focus on my grades. And I'm like, interesting. So God's okay with you distancing yourself from Christian fellowship because of grades, and that also happens to coincide with you getting a new boyfriend. Interesting.
It's amazing how often that happens.
But as soon as somebody says the like God says, it's like a trump card, right?
No pun intended.
We can't use that term anymore.
It's and then he's like, how do I fight this? Like, but then you're like, I would say like that's a really tangible example of taking the Lord's name of like, God says, God told me. Really? Are you sure? But which with the mask issue then goes into like what kind of freedom do we have that's biblical versus what is American? Those
are the same thing, aren't they?
You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
No, I think that's a valuable thing. Zach, what were you going to say?
No, I think just going back, it kind of goes with both the mask and the God says this type of stuff. Is that I've seen more things on Facebook, like more memes or more things on Facebook where it was like, well, if Jesus was around today, he would have wore a mask, or like different things like that, like trying to use like the Bible and taking like quotes out of context and then just being like, see, God would have done it, so why can't you? And you're like, okay, listen, like that didn't mean anything that you just said, and you make no sense. But you don't want to call them out because you don't want to be like super rude, you know?
Oh, I call them out.
Some of us do.
I know. I have a problem with that. I know, right? I'm learning to. Thank you guys for all the teachings.
I don't do it as much in public, like on public Facebook, just because of things that I've done more recently than I have before, but I think you're right, Zach, because it's just as bad for people to be like, Jesus would have worn a mask, because like, just like, let's not put things on Jesus that's just bad argumentation. Like we can't, it's as bad as the meme that went around that was like, Jesus was a socialist Jew who like all those things. And it was like, guys, let's not project 21st century ideas onto Jesus when he speaks for himself quite well anyway. Like,
real Facebook is so scary.
Real Facebook. As opposed to fake Facebook.
I go to our group and I'm just like, my safe place. I can say what I want.
Or so you think.
Unless your name's Lindsay.
Yeah.
and that safe place that they're speaking of, just so everybody knows, is a closed group of Assemblies of God pastors, because we're all in the Assemblies of God. So I'm not going to let you know which group that is, because then you might try to infiltrate it. So the place that is safe that they're speaking of relatively is all pastors who should have the love and grace of Christ in their dialogue.
And some of the snark of Christ.
Okay, you know what? I'm pretty sure that's acceptable, because like, you know how many times it feels like in the book of Matthew where Jesus is like, even the tax collectors, Like, that, like, why is Matthew writing even the tax collectors? Because he was a tax collector. Like, there's some sarcasm happening there, right?
Yes.
I'm okay with it. Granted, I like sarcasm. I think Jesus was sarcastic sometimes. Well, he absolutely was. But
Oh, have you guys seen The Chosen? Sorry, I know this is
so good.
The
I've only
Chosen
seen
is
one episode.
Oh,
It's
keep
fantastic.
watching. Jesus gets so more funny and so more like a real person. Like, I am so sorry. We just went completely off topic, but The Chosen, when we first watched it, I was like, what am I watching? Like, this is cool. And, and then it just kept going episode after episode. And I was like, Jesus was a real person. And my wife was like, yeah, duh.
And I want to hang out with him.
Yes. It's like, I want to be best friends with this guy because he just made a silly dance and he just said this and he just told Peter this. And it was just like, it was amazing. It like made him more real because I'm tired of the regular, like the Joe Schmo, like Jesus was the only thing he ever said was stuff in the Bible.
Scary cult leader Jesus?
Yes.
Wait, what'd you say, Lindsay? I didn't hear you.
Scary cult leader Jesus, right? Like the super aloof, like only always pontificating. I'm like, but people want to spend time with this guy. Like there's all these people following around. People like him.
Yeah.
Right. He's got to be likable.
Yeah. I like the part where he stares down Peter when the boat with the fish and the miraculous catch of fish. And Peter's like, this isn't going to work. And Jesus just like, oh, really now? And just like stares him down. And it's just,
okay, I'll just wait.
It's fantastic.
Right. So Jesus was a likable guy, but also when he spoke to the religious leaders, he also called them broods of vipers.
Oh, he was fierce.
So like,
yeah,
like I think that's definitely some snark going on there. Like Jesus is both likable, but also speaks truth to power when it's appropriate.
I think it's telling who he's harsh with and who he's not, right? Like you see the woman at the well and he's so gentle. Even though he's a little bit snarky with her, but right, it's mostly in response to her snark.
Right.
But he responds very gently to people who are genuinely looking for him to be like to figure out who he is, and people who don't know. But these people who claim to know better, there is lots of shade that is being thrown, right? Like,
oh, for sure. Now, where does that leave us, though, right? As Christians and as, talking to people or seeing somebody that doesn't believe or whatever, or has like these like outward sin, right? Like the stuff that you can see on the outside or whatever versus the stuff that you can't really see. I know it's a weird word, but where does that leave us? And like, are we supposed to be likable to them? But then everybody that I've ever grown up into church with, it says, you're not supposed to be likable to the world. The world's supposed to see you as different and they're not supposed to, be able to fellowship with you. And you're just like, that doesn't make any sense.
The early church had the favor of the people in the book of Acts.
Right.
Like right after Pentecost. It's like they grew and they had the favor of the people. And it's like, I think that's what's been hard for me about the whole mask thing is that I feel like people who should know better are the ones like asserting their liberty at the expense of other people. And I'm like, it's easier for me to critique that than it is to critique the other because one of them's claiming to follow Jesus. So like my frustration with the conservative right gets voiced a lot more than my frustration with the left because of the fact one side is claiming that God's on their side. And so I get a lot more vocal about it because one of them is claiming to represent this standard and not. And the other is actually representing in times some of these truths, but not claiming to follow Jesus while they're doing it. And I think that's part of the reason that the people have been responding so weirdly to churches like doing all of this stuff during the pandemic, right? It's people like, they should care. Why don't they? They say that they do. Why don't they? So I've definitely got a bit table flippy with some of these people who should know better. Like, but I think there's a level of that. Like there's a difference between like loving people authentically and they can really see that. But also like Jesus also never left it a question where he stood on things, right? The rich young ruler is like, oh yeah, I've kept all these laws since I was, a kid. He's like, well, go sell everything. He's like, ah, crap.
I think, and that's important too, because I know Lindsay in particular, you've experienced this, and I have too. And I think I've seen Caleb like be kind of harpooned by this. And Zach, I don't know what your experience is, but have had people kind of come at us in different settings, whether it's public, whether it's in our group, whether it's in conversation, or et cetera. It's like, why kind of ask the question of why you only call out the right or why you only call out the Republican Party or why are you only critical of Trump? Like, why haven't you been more vocal about being critical of the other side? And I think that's a poignant thing to understand too, of like, because scripture talks about not judging those outside, like you can't hold people who don't follow Jesus to the standards of Jesus, but to hold those accountable. If you're claiming to follow Jesus, like, all right, I'm going to hold you to that standard. Put your money where your mouth is in regards to this. And so then that's easier to call out and more appropriate for us to call out and critique and hold accountable than just saying, oh my gosh, the evil insert non-Christian politician or insert whatever here. And that's easier to call out than just ranting about the evil in the world, I guess. And so I think we've all experienced that. Zach, I don't know if you've experienced that as much.
Not as much. I try and keep peace as much as possible, but I'm more in the middle of most things as it is. So I know when to argue and when to, kind of die on a hill and when not to. And like some of this stuff isn't like a big death sentence for me. I'm not really waiting for that. But I will say that the mask thing has been a very big thing for people to like, they just want to die on that hill and it's not worth it. The whole thing about the mask is that this pandemic came out of nowhere. We have no idea. And when it first started, how it was transmitted. I have some college in medicine, so I kind of know a little bit, but we don't have, any evidence of how it was transmitted or what was going on. And so the CDC said masks weren't worth it, right? And then they came out and said, actually, masks are worth it. And then everybody's like, well, which one is it? We don't know. Well, most people don't realize that we watched the scientific method for diseases happen over the last 8 months happen, like in real life. And so we're getting upset about that. But like when the flu comes out, we know exactly what to do.
I was going to say, the mask statement didn't actually ever say that masks didn't work. It was a clever rhetorical statement that implied that you individually right now do not need a mask because there weren't enough of them.
Right. Don't go buy a mask. Like that was the whole point. Don't go out and buy a mask when the medical establishment doesn't have the masks that they need, because guess what? There's been a fire in Australia that's needed all of the N95s so that way people can live. So we didn't have the N95s we needed. We didn't have the medical masks that we needed because people in Australia needed them because of the wildfires. So it was as much a don't go out and buy them, because your doctors who are treating people every day, they need to not die of this.
Yeah, in fact, I'm trying to find the statement, but it was almost explicitly, it never said they don't work. It was just like, they do not currently recommend the use of masks for the general public. That's from February 12th, right? Which doesn't mean they don't work. And the briefings were saying too, they're like, the current risk to any individual American is low. I was like, that doesn't mean it's not spreading or dangerous. It is like today, at this moment in time, they were lawyering up and using like very legalese kind of language to be specific and precise. They're like, at this moment in time, the risk to random Kansas person number 572 is like, you're probably not going to be exposed to coronavirus. They're not saying it's not growing, right? And it's just like, we don't understand. That's a whole different side topic about how we don't understand rhetoric and how to read things. But I think it's the same problem we're having with all of this stuff, right? But they never actually said masks don't work. They're like, you just don't need one as a civilian right now. And then they went for, okay, we've got them. You should probably wear them because you're not doing other stuff. So please don't kill each other.
Right. And I was an early adopter of masks. I was in Pennsylvania at the time. I traveled to Texas in March. And then when I got back from that trip is when I started wearing a mask anytime that I was in public, which was still months before mask mandates anywhere, because, there was a risk of transmission, right? There was the study in Germany that released the end of January that said that there's asymptomatic spread. And so having read that study at the beginning of February, once I knew there was a high likelihood that I'd been exposed, I wore a mask. Now, I looked weird because nobody else in the country was wearing a mask yet, but as a way of, if I had been exposed, if I was going to be an asymptomatic transmitter of disease, which is still a thing, I wanted to make sure that I was showing my neighbor love by not killing them.
I found the quote from March 31st. You don't want to take masks away from the healthcare providers who are in a real and present danger of getting infected, Dr. Fauci said. Basically, he continues on, the idea of getting a much more broad community-wide use of masks outside of the healthcare setting is under very active discussion. Never once said masks don't work. They're like, just don't take them away from healthcare providers. And so we're having an argument that like never even should have started.
Bingo.
Yeah.
But again, we've politicized morality. And when you politicize morality, people dig in their heels instead of doing what's right. They do what's their side.
Yeah, it's like a sunk cost fallacy. They're like, well, I'm in this far. I got to keep going now.
Yeah.
Do people, I don't think, like I grew up not understanding that I was able to change my mind. Do people still have that mindset? Like, I've been a conservative for 30 years and now I can't change my mind on it?
I think that has to be what's going on.
Or you get called wishy-washy. You ever heard that? Like, you're a wishy-washy kind of political person, like you changed your view on something. And it was like, I also read 6 articles and 4 research papers on how this was killing people, and I realized it's wrong. And so I changed my mind. And they're like, well, you change your mind too much. Oh yeah, you're flip-flop.
Yeah, for people, do you remember like growing up in like youth group and stuff, they would always tell you that like, oh, well, society doesn't believe in absolute truth and all of these things. And now these are the same people who are like, don't care about truth anymore.
Well, no. What they believe in is absolute truth, in that what they believe is the truth and nothing you say is against it.
Yes.
So when we believe that truth is relative, as good postmoderns should, when we're standing in a different place, we might see something as different. And so if we believe that we hold absolute truth, in our belief. And if we believe that somebody has told us absolute truth, there's nothing that's ever going to change our perspective. So if we believe Donald Trump when he says you should never wear a mask, we're going to believe that even when 2 months later Donald Trump says, you should wear a mask, because you believed an absolute truth and were unwilling to change it as perspective and information changed.
Yep. I think the problem is people have conflated their opinion with objective truth, right? And they're like, my opinion is just as valid. And I was like, well, no, it's not. Your opinion is not equally valid. Like, you're equally important as a human, but your opinion is not equally valid. Like,
right. The value of your opinion is not intrinsically tied to your worth as a human created in the image of God.
I'm not going to go argue with my mechanic how to fix my car because, I read it my opinion is equally valid. And I don't think my check engine light should be on.
That Reddit post said I didn't have to get a new tire for my car because
then when, if you're going into surgery, you don't be like, okay, hey, I read that actually you should be using, a number 10 scalpel for my appendectomy instead of an 8. So I'm going to want to, no, you don't. I don't know, Caleb. I'm making stuff up. Don't look at me in that tone of voice. We don't go telling professionals how to do their job as backseat drivers. And which actually, Lindsay, I was thinking as you were reading the quote about what their actual statements were, and you kind of lawyering up and using that language, I was like, maybe that's something that just needs to also be changed about political statements is okay, guys, can we cut through the BS? Don't do the cover your ass lawyer type jargon and just say what you need to say and what you mean behind it. Instead of kind of those reading through lines, because people can't apparently read through rhetoric.
I don't know. I sort of prefer just making all of my conversations and all of my life that lawyer speak. That's sort of the approach I've taken.
Yes, because you're a jerk.
Oh.
I mean, you're not wrong.
We need Horton Hears a Who, right? I meant what I said. I said what I meant.
Yeah, exactly.
Between that and the, what is it? Oh, it's and so you cause a whole awful lot.
I don't know what you're saying, Lindsay.
No, it's the one who say I'm the speaker for the trees. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not
is that the Lorax?
There it is. Yeah, that's its name.
The only reason I know that is because of TikTok.
That hurts my soul a little bit.
Well, this lady that plays piano that's on there or whatever, she was making the Lorax a musical, and she was singing part of it as the mom, and she needed somebody to duet her or whatever. And they were talking about trees, and that's the only reason I know is because it sounded familiar. But TikTok's a good place to get political information too if you're just curious.
It is. I saw this TikTok thing on the Uyghurs, which was pretty intense.
Are we not going to talk at all about how basically it's a data harvesting thing? And
well, let's talk about that later.
I think that's another conversation for another 2-hour-long podcast. But
yeah, I think it's a conversation for another day. Now it's time to talk about our news story. This just came out yesterday at the time we're recording this. The podcast will probably release Friday, but then it has to get distributed. So at some point in the next week, it'll show up in all of the podcast feeds. But TBN announced that they are dropping Kenneth Copeland. After over 40 years, they are finally getting rid of Believer's Voice of Victory.
Is that their time in the desert?
And
they got new management, so yeah, we can say that.
What are your thoughts on Kenneth Copeland leaving? I'm trying to figure out nice words.
I'm more new to I've only been in the charismatic Pentecostal AG movement, I guess, for about the last 10 years.
I mean, Kenneth Copeland isn't, but okay. Go keep
I know. But I'm just saying, so when you come from a Baptist, background, anybody that speaks out more than, halfway raises their hand, you think they're probably some Pentecostal charismatic person, right? And so you just automatically assume, and so when I was younger, I was like, this guy's nuts. How is he on TV, people? You know what I mean? I don't really have much to say about him now because I like that. Yeah, I like that. Who they're changing him out for, though. I think that's really good. I think Elevation worships are really good.
The way you enunciated Elevation, I heard Elvish worship, and I was like, bring on Elvis worship, man! That'd be amazing.
Flute, suede shoes.
Lord of the Rings worship.
Don't get me wrong. I'm pretty sure Stephen Furtick could probably do some Elvis impressions up on stage, but
that's true.
Yeah, I think it'll be a good fit for a revamp of TBN
Yeah.
because I think it's going downhill right now, from what I can see.
I've thought that my entire adult life. So
I think, and so interestingly enough, I think all of you grew up in the church, and I did not. I came to faith in college, really. And so any TV preacher was like, they'd be cray cray. Like there was no admiration for televangelists. Nobody in my life took anything that anybody on TV that was like talking about any sort of faith was a valid source of anything. So I think that's also something to be said or something to heed in our, like, not just is the programming like for Christians, but what is the message that it's sending those outside the church, or what is the perspective or perception is maybe the better term. So, I mean, I think like I was just rereading the article, and the quote talks about they're making changes to programming over the last several years. Part of the transition is they're choosing to move away from telethons. They've upgraded to HD, which seems like that took too long. Expanded their streaming platforms and forged partnerships with family brands like K-Love, Museum of the Bible, and others, and have replaced some programs with new original content from voices like Christine Kane, Mike Huckabee, Mike Rowe, and more. So I think that them expanding is really good and having some more sources. I'm glad to see like Christine Kane included in that, and hopefully other women will be included, which will be interesting to see how they navigate that.
All you need is one, then it counts.
I mean, here's the thing. Kenneth Copeland's wife has been on his show forever, right? Like, that's been part of it. And she regularly comes on and does teaching. So they've been non-complementarian forever. They've just also been crazy.
Yeah, do you guys remember 2015 when he talked about he couldn't fly in a regular plane because he was in a tube with a bunch of demons? Like talking about all the rest of the people in the airplane?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Kenneth Copeland said that. 2015.
That's why he needed a private jet, a new one.
Yeah.
And his old one wasn't good enough.
At the front door.
Yep, that's a real thing.
No.
So he also said back in March that the pandemic was over.
Yeah, because he blew
it away, right?
Yeah, he blew it away.
So I think something that's telling about Copeland's programming is that, you know, he released a statement about him leaving and all of that, saying that he's going to leave. And one of the things that he said is the Believer's Voice of Victory broadcasts will continue to bring the word of God to build your faith so you can live in abundance of love, health, prosperity, and fellowship Jesus has provided.
I saw that too.
And that thing, what he says, is not the gospel. Like that's a false gospel, as it is. Like the gospel doesn't provide you life in abundance, health, prosperity. The only promise that the gospel brings you in this life is of suffering for the name of Christ. That's what you promise. You promise tribulation and persecution, and like living the American dream is not the gospel of Christ. And I think that this is possibly, hopefully, a step away from some of that prosperity false gospel business for TBN, and hopefully a step towards, even if Furtick's hermeneutics aren't always the best, and I don't always agree with him, you know, at least it's not a fake gospel.
I think the other promise we do get, at least in the gospel, is having a life of purpose through suffering for Jesus.
But he didn't even use the word purpose.
He used prosperity and abundance.
He used abundance of love, health, prosperity, and fellowship Jesus has provided.
No.
He didn't even say purpose.
I never used it, but the what I'm saying is like in Scripture, like we're also like that's also part of the you know, a positive thing.
Absolutely.
It's not all suffering. At least, you know, you're suffering for a purpose. It's not like Buddhism where you're suffering to just evaporate into nothingness.
True.
I think it's super cool. You see, like, and this is the thing we're all kind of obsessed and talk about a lot, right? But the idea of like Jesus being Lord, like, and the Lordship, and then like that being good news, like, if that can be good news despite what people like Apostle Paul went through, like, we're missing something in our gospel if like if that's what we think it is, right? Like you were saying, Caleb. And I think it's interesting because we hear that, we're like, oh, that's not good news anymore. We're like, okay, so then why does the Bible call this good news? Why do people respond to it like they did?
That's good.
Because we're missing a ton, you know, and it's clearly Christians that lived through the Black Plague still thought it was good news. And
well, you know, it's good news in other countries. You know what I mean? It's not always good news in America. And I know that sounds weird, but like if you go to another country and preach about Jesus, they're like, wow, this is really good news and I love it and blah, blah, blah. But then you get to America and they're like, yeah, I'm saved. Don't worry about it. I prayed when I was little. Like, that's it. And so It's just,
Ah,
I know. We can delete that. Whatever.
No. I think next time our big section in the middle, we need to just talk about what the gospel is.
For sure. Because, I mean, as much as we have people that are, people from our group and Christians listening to this, maybe somebody that is kind of dabbling in Christianity or trying to see what it's all about finds our podcast, and they're just like, what are these guys about? And then, I mean, I think sharing the gospel is a really big thing, and it should be part of our, at least once, right? And then kind of hints everywhere.
Well, I think understanding the gospel is going to make all of our arguments that we're talking about make sense, because that's what we're coming back to. And we're like, basically, we're saying that
this is our foundation.
Many American Christians have a profound misunderstanding of like the good news of Jesus and what it means.
Yes.
Because that's all of this is coming back to. That point is like, we as a culture have lost what it actually means that when Jesus says he is Lord and that it's good news, we've lost what it means. And that's why everything else is in chaos.
Right.
Like,
we got to go back to the beginning.
The gospel is the good news that Jesus is king. And that's where it starts and that's where it ends.
Zach, the reason why I laughed at your dabbling remark was not because it's not a real word, because I love that word. But whenever I tell my testimony of like, I always say that I was like dabbling in Christianity in high school and like going to youth group and stuff, but like didn't really get it. So I just had to laugh at like somebody else using dabbling like that when normally it's like a negative connotation of like, I'm dabbling in witchcraft.
I dabble dabbling in Christianity. That's true. It's true.
So it was, I mean, I will definitely tell you if, I will definitely tell you if you use a word that is not an actual word.
You played Magic the Gathering once in youth group and now you're dabbling in witchcraft, right?
Played Dungeons and Dragons once with a group of pastors and oof.
Can we talk about both those games and how awesome they are? Because I learned how to play last year when I was
maybe.
Neither of them.
But we've gone
too long.
We've recorded for 55 minutes here. We probably have like at least 30 minutes of high quality-ish content. So I think it's probably time that we should like sign off. So I think that we should tell everybody goodbye, and then maybe we'll add some cool fancy outro music here later that nobody's thought to put together for us, because I didn't.
Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Barely Saved podcast, where we have the discussions real Christians don't have. For show notes and links, go to barelysavedpodcast.com.